Hello, in this video we will be learning about UV mapping in Blender. In the previous video we looked at how to texture objects in Blender. But one problem is, how would you map where your texture is placed on your model? Sure, we can use that generated node and sort of nudge around the coordinates to get it the way we want, and that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But what if your models are a lot more complex and you have tons and tons of different components to your model? For example, a character model. How would you know where each part of your texture goes where on your 3D model? That might not make sense. For example, say you have a picture of a tattoo and you want to put that picture of that tattoo on your character's arms. How would you go about doing that? I mean, we can try to use the generated map and sort of nudge our way around. But say we want to have not only the tattoo, but the entire character's texture included as well, his whole skin texture included as well in the one image. That might be a little bit difficult. So currently, the best way to map textures to 3D models is called UV mapping. It's not a terminology that's related to Blender only. It is applicable to any 3D software. UV mapping is the process of mapping textures to 3D models. So let's just have a look at that in detail now. I'm just going to drag out a new window by left-click dragging the corner there, and then change to the UV image editor. Now when I press tab, I go into the edit mode. To texture this cube, we first need to UV unwrap this model. What that means is basically you can imagine sort of taking a scissor and cutting away at these edges and then laying it flat on the ground so that we can overlay an image on top of that. Let's imagine UV mapping this way. Imagine your 3D object is wearing a tight bodysuit. That bodysuit is cut into pieces, then laid flat on the ground. So all those little pieces are laid flat on a 2D ground. It doesn't have to be separate pieces, it can be all in one piece as well. You would then overlay your texture over this suit, such that now, when your 3D object wears that suit again, it has your textures laid all properly. I hope that makes sense. So let's just have a look at UV unwrapping in action. So make sure you're in edit mode first, and then if I press U, you can see all the different options of UV unwrapping your model. So if I simply press unwrap, you can see Blender has tried to unwrap this model, and you can just see a square. So basically it might not make much sense by looking at it, but if I just select the edges here, you can see that it sort of ripped apart all these squares one by one and overlaid them one over the other. So you can sort of see this if let's just use a face select mode. If I sort of move this square here, move this square here, move this square maybe up, and the rest so on. Oops. And now if I select them all, you can see that Blender has just ripped apart all the faces and just overlaid them one over the other, such that if I now applied a texture, so I'm just going to use an image texture for this example, and I want to load the texture that I already have here, which is a leaf. Now to see our texture, I'm just going to go and open up the texture over here, so you can see that the texture is now being overlaid over our 3D object. And to see our texture in action in our 3D model, so in other words, if the 3D object was wearing that tight bodysuit again, we just change this mode from solid to texture. You can also use material. Both pretty much do the same thing. So if I select this face, I can move the texture, and you can see it in real time that you can better position where your texture will lie. So if you had a tattoo, you can much better place that wherever you want now. Alright, so that is the magic of UV unwrapping. In the 3D modeling world, this is a very, very bad unwrap. Texturers would hate to see an unwrap like this. So usually you would have to create seams. Seams are pretty much like telling Blender to use the scissors to cut at only these locations. For example, let's try to create a perfect cut of our model where our object will lay flat on the ground but connected. We just want to have this as one solid piece. So we have to create seams. I'm just going to go into the edge select mode. Let's now start creating seams. So I want to be able to see my object better. So I'm just going to change back to solid. And let's select that one. That one. That one. But I don't want to cut this. I want to keep this joined with this one. But I don't mind cutting this. 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 And this. I think that should be good. So that should tell Blender scissors to cut along these edges without having to create separate pieces for each face. So now to actually mark the seam, you press Control E and mark seam. Alternatively, you can press Mesh Edges, which you can see Control E, and then mark seam. If you want to get rid of them, you just go Control E, clear seam, and that'll get rid of them. So I don't want to get rid of them. I want to make sure they're there. Mark seam. I'm not sure if this is correct, but let's find out. It's always good to test it out. So I want to press A to deselect everything, A to select everything again, U, and then unwrap. And whoa, I actually got it perfect. I actually didn't expect that. There you can see it's a perfect unwrap. So if I change back to texture now, I can actually see that, you know, it actually unwrapped beautifully. And if I'm making like a dice or something, I can easily create one texture in Photoshop or GIMP and add in the numbers there. And there you go, you have your texture. And then you come back to Blender, you line it up, and bang, you have your dice texture pretty much done. So that's pretty handy.